Hi, welcome back to the Fantasy Football Profits. This is our Week 12 start sit video. Before I get into the video, I always love to take a moment to thank everybody that's been a part of the community for about the last year and a half. We appreciate that so much. We love you guys. Anyways, help us to continue to build the community. You can do that a few ways. Continue to watch, obviously. Comment, like, share videos, and hit the notification buttons so when new videos come out or contests, you're aware of that. Now, before we get into the video, you need to contextualize this information. Every league is different. Bench size, waiver wire availability, scoring system, etc. And so we give you basic information, but you're going to have to take and flex that into your league. So for you, we may say to sit a guy, but you may not have somebody out there that's actually worth starting. So for you, what that really means is really lower your expectations for him. And we really try to answer specific start-sit questions on the bottom. If you leave a comment, we try to get back to you in a timely manner and give you a decent breakdown of why we believe what we believe. Of course, that's a little limited. Another final thing I want to mention, people say, why do a start-sit video on Tuesday? There's always changing information, and that's certainly true. But one, this week, there's 3 Thursday games, so there's a lot going on earlier in the week. But also, there will always be changing information. Even if we did a video Friday or even Saturday, Sunday morning, half hour before kickoff, things can change. So it's really important for you to constantly check information. We try to put a video out on Friday to update any changes that may happen out there.
Yeah, absolutely. If you guys are looking to play some more fantasy, I know it's the time of year where maybe you've got some playoff spots locked, or maybe you're locked out of the playoffs, but you still want to play it and you're looking for daily fantasy. Of course, make sure to check out Thrive Fantasy. We have a link in the description down below. It's absolutely worth the shot. It's daily fantasy done a little bit differently than most, and so I think that's absolutely worth it. It helps support us and support them, and of course, you can at least give it a try to see if you like it. But Rob, you have something you want to mention. I believe that is going to be upcoming contests.
Yeah, so we have a contest, week 17. Watch a video. We're going to release some information on how you can enter free contests. You can win some free products from us, and it's a fun way to extend your fantasy football season into the playoffs this year. So watch that video. It's coming out real soon there. So I guess if you don't have anything more to say, let's just get right into the first game.
All right.
So look at the Lions versus the Bears. Now, one of the things we always say in the videos, if we don't mention a name here, then you can safely assume just to sit that guy. But I love to start with the quarterback. Start with Matthew Stafford. Versus the Bears, giving them the 13th most points to quarterbacks, and that stat's actually getting better for the Bears. That defense is improving quite a bit. You look at Khalil Mack, missed a few games. He's healthy. He's playing now. The last 4 games, they're only allowing 15.34 points to quarterbacks. So that defense is getting better and better, and they were already a very good defense to begin with. Now you add the fact that Stafford has lost Golden Tate, Kerryon Johnson is out, and it looks like Marvin Jones most likely is going to miss this game, so he's missing a lot of weapons there. Besides the fact that it's a home game on Thanksgiving, there's just a million other reasons why I would stay away from Matthew Stafford this week, and I would sit him if you can afford to do that. As far as Mitch Trubisky goes, so he's playing the Lions, allowing the 13th most points to quarterbacks. A couple weeks ago, Mitch lit them up. He went for 355 yards, 3 touchdowns, and he had a rushing touchdown versus the Lions. Now, he had a stretch there where he was really hot as a quarterback, but 2 of the last 3 weeks he's been quiet. Well, some of that was game flow. When he played the Bills, they absolutely destroyed the Bills. They didn't need to do a whole lot there. Then versus Minnesota, had a quieter game there, but 1, Minnesota's defense is good. And 2, they really controlled that game from the onset of the game, which is really hard for me to say as a Vikings fan, but they were clearly the better team there, even though the score looked closer at the end, 25-20. I don't think the score really indicated. I think Chicago dominated that. In that game, he was very efficient. They didn't need to take a lot of chances. They didn't need to press it downfield there. He's got a good matchup on Thanksgiving. I like Mitch Trubisky. Go ahead and start him in this one. Now, one side note on Mitch Trubisky, something that you need to be aware about there. Bears coach Matt Nagy came out and said Mitch Trubisky's shoulder is day-to-day. Sounds like he hurt his shoulder. Now, ESPN's Adam Schefter reported the Bears are optimistic Trubisky will play Thanksgiving. But Nagy didn't sound nearly as optimistic during a press conference. He wrote a long-term injury, said it's not a long-term injury there, but he went on to say that Trubisky is in pain and he's unlikely to practice Tuesday. Trubisky legitimately looks questionable at this point. Chase Daniels, of course, is his backup there. So is he going to play or not? They think he's going to play. The coach came out and said he doesn't really know. My opinion, I think nobody knows at this point if he's going to. I think it's coach speak. I think Mitch Trubisky plays in this game, and I think it's a great play for you if you have him. Let's get to running backs. Kerryon Johnson. Talked about him already, and he's not expected to play. Minus a miracle at this point, he's going to miss that game, so go ahead and sit him. Now, a lot of sites out there pushing like Garrett Blount as a waiver wire pickup. I can't begin to tell you how I would stay away from him. Do not pick this guy up and do not play him for many reasons, even though Johnson is out. He has struggled badly all year. He's got a 2.3 yards per carry. In the last 4 games, he's got 16 total yards on 21 carries. He's a guy that shouldn't even be on a roster at this point. Now, let's look at Theo Riddick. Theo Riddick has PPR value in flex as a flex play in deep leagues, and that was before the Johnson injury. So now with Johnson out there, his role is going to increase greatly, especially this week. In the last 3 games, he's had 22 targets and 18 catches. I don't think that's a fluke, especially now like Golden Tate is gone. He's getting a lot of those targets there. So I really like Theo Riddick this week. Another thing I think bodes really well for him, why he's a solid play in PPR leagues, the Lions are playing from behind quite often there. So I would start Theo as a high-end running back 2 in PPR leagues and standards. He's much lower. He's more of a running back 3 in standards this week. As far as running backs go for Chicago, got Jordan Howard there. Playing the Lions, allowing the 10th most points to running backs. Now, his PPR value is non-existent. If you look at Jordan Howard, he's got 3 catches in the last 7 games for a total of 22 yards there. So in PPR leagues, pretty much he's non-existent. His yards per carry are down for the year at 3.4. So if you look at Jordan Howard, he still has value, but his value is what I would call volume-based, touchdown-dependent in standard leagues. With that said, the Lions are not very good against the run. They allow a lot of points to running backs. And I assume this is a game that the Bears are going to be able to pound the ball with Jordan Howard. So he might get 20 carries for 65 yards and a touchdown. Not exciting statistics. He's a low-end running back too this week, and he does have value in standard leagues, but not high value. And you have Tariq Cohen. So if you look at Cohen, his values in PPR leagues, I don't expect him to get more than 7 or 8 carries a game. That's kind of about his ceiling in terms of carries go. But he's targeted off in the passing game. Right now in the year, he's got 40 catches. So I look at him as in PPR leagues, a low-end running back too. And that's kind of where he's at on that one. He can be started, but I would only start him in PPR leagues. I would avoid him in standard leagues. As far as wide receivers go, you got Kenny Galladay of the Lions. The Bears' defense is good. But the one area where they seem to give up yards and points is also to wide receivers. Right now, the Bears are allowing the 7th most points to wide receivers. Now, in the first 5 games this year, Kenny Galladay looked great. Then he went a stretch of about 3 games. He was really quiet, but now he's rebounded again the last 2 games. The last 2 games, he's got 27 targets for 14 catches, 2 touchdowns, 191 yards. So he's rebounded really nicely there. And I think a lot is the fact that now Golden Tate is not there, and it sounds like Marvin Jones is going to be out. So I think his targets are going to remain high. I like Kenny as a wide receiver 2 start. You have Marvin Jones. He remains week to week with a bone bruise on his knee. Right now, it looks like Marvin Jones is going to miss that game, so it would be wise to sit him. The guy that benefited the most from Jones being out was Bruce Ellington. He was a benefactor of Jones sitting. He had 6 catches for 52 yards the last game, but he's against a good Bears defense, and he doesn't have the pedigree. This guy's not very talented per se, so I would avoid him. Then you have Anthony Miller, wide receiver for the Bears, whereas he said, well, the Lions allow the 15th fewest points to wide receivers. But they kind of padded those statistics early. If you look at the Lions, they didn't play a lot of good wide receivers through the first 5 games. Here's some of the wide receivers that they faced. Jets, Bills, San Francisco, Dallas without Cooper, and they faced New England in week 4 that didn't have Edelman and Gordon. And week 3 there. So if you look at that last few weeks, actually bleeding a lot of stats to wide receivers. They're very vulnerable there. They've been torched by DJ Moore, Allen Robinson, Miller a couple weeks ago when they played the Lions, torched them. And so those are guys that I would definitely start. In fact, Miller torched him for 5 catches, 122 yards, and a TD. I would start Miller as a wide receiver 3 in large leagues. As far as Allen Robinson goes, now we advised sitting him against Xavier Rhodes in the Vikings, and he did have a quiet game. But that's a tough matchup for him there. Against the Lions, last time he played him, he had 133 yards and 2 touchdowns. I would expect he's going to rebound this week. Start him as a solid wide receiver 3. If you're in a very large league, I would start Allen Robinson as a wide receiver 2. They have Taylor Gabriel. So after 4 games, Gabriel had been really quiet for about 4 games, and he had an uptick in targets against the Vikings. And the reason why that happened, I think, is because Miller and Robinson faced some good cornerbacks. So he ended up going out. He had 7 catches, 52 yards. I don't expect that volume to continue. I would sit Gabriel this week. As far as Trey Burton goes, plays the Lions, allowing the 13th fewest points to tight ends. Tight end is a thin position, so start him, but lower your expectations with Trey Burton. I would sit the Lions tight ends. I look at kickers Parquet and Prater. They're both startable, but they're not high-end plays. And then I would start the Bears defense, but I would sit the Lions defense there. So.
All right, that sounds good. Let's get to the next game. All right, so now let's get to a pretty big game with some news, the Redskins versus the Cowboys. Now, in case you live under a rock and haven't heard, Alex Smith is hurt. If you watch the play, it was pretty brutal. He broke his tibia and his fibia, was it?
Yeah.
He is done. He's on the IR. He's not playing anymore. So who's coming in to replace him? Well, that's Colt McCoy. First question we have to ask ourselves is, should you play Colt McCoy? I'm going to say no. For starters, he's a backup quarterback. He hasn't earned a starting job. He's in there because of an injury. On top of that, he's playing a Cowboys team that is actually pretty good. Their defense has stepped it up this season. They're not fantastic, but only allowing 236 passing yards a game this season puts them 10th best in the NFL. He doesn't have the greatest receiving core and everything like that, and of course he hasn't had much time to adjust into this role as a starting quarterback for the season, and so don't play McCoy. On the other side, we see Dak Prescott. While Dak Prescott has had a rushing touchdown in 4 of the last 5 games, I still want to suggest against playing him. Again, if you guys are in, a 2-quarterback league or a deep 16-team league, if you're desperate, right, I understand sometimes you just got to put any name in there. Sometimes you got to. But in this case, I'm going to say unless you're absolutely desperate, do not play him. Not only does he play the Redskins defense, which is 14th best against quarterbacks as far as allowing fantasy points goes, which has been all right. He hasn't been amazing. He's not throwing for a whole lot of yards, and again, he's just struggled a little bit. And so I'm not a huge Dak Prescott fan. That's very much there leaning on the running game. And that's because of Ezekiel Elliott. So let's get to the running backs. Absolutely must start Ezekiel Elliott. The guy's averaging 194 yards per scrimmage over the last 2 games. He is so dominant, and they're just leaning on him, letting him almost literally carry that team to victory. And so, yeah, absolutely must start him. I don't see a situation where I'm not going to put him in my lineup. On the other side, what about Adrian Peterson? Well, because a backup quarterback is going to be in, they're probably going to be giving the ball quite a bit more to Adrian Peterson, and he seems to be the leading back in that offense right now. That is exciting, but I'm going to say, don't play him, right? Maybe a flex if you're in a 2-quarterback league and you're kind of shallow at the running back position, but I'm going to lean against it. First of all, it plays the Cowboys with the 8th best defense as far as limiting running backs and fantasy points, but with that backup quarterback being in, with Colt McCoy being in, Alex Smith being out, that should hurt the passing game, and he may get more carries, but the Cowboys, they're not dumb. They know what's going to come, and they're going to cover that, and, he's also a little bit older. I don't even know exactly how old he is now, but again, I don't think he's quite the Adrian of old, and so want to get excited, yes, but I don't think he's going to be a huge play this week. We'll move on to the wide receivers, starting with Dallas. Let's talk about Amari Cooper. In PPR leagues, I find me maybe putting him at flex or a wide receiver 3. Again, another guy. This is not an exciting game, but another guy I'm not excited about, but may find my way onto a roster if I need to fill a spot. He's had 23 targets in the last 3 games, and so for that reason, I like him a little bit, but he's not huge. As far as the other wide receivers for the Dallas Cowboys, I'm just plain and simple going to say I won't touch them. I won't put them in my lineup. They haven't been productive, and neither has Dak Prescott, which is, again, why I kind of leaned and cautioned against starting him. So we'll go now to the Washington Redskins. What about Josh Doctson? Well, another guy that I'm going to say probably I'm going to lean against playing. In the last 6 games, he has had at least 3 catches every game, which is okay, shows a little consistency, but in those last 6 games, he hasn't had over 50 yards receiving. And on top of that, this week he goes against the defense, giving up the 4th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. Maurice Harris was a guy who was trending upward and gaining a little bit of momentum, but then Alex Smith gets hurt, and Colt McCoy only gives him 1 target, or I believe 1 reception when he was in during that span. For whatever reason, we see wide receivers greatly influenced by the quarterback throwing, simply around chemistry and how they manage game flow and what they like to do. And he didn't seem to like Harris, so I'm projecting that will continue this week. On top of that, he was never a fantastic play, and he does have a tough matchup, so I'm going to sit Harris this week. I'd start Jordan Reed. Like you mentioned previously, Jordan Reed is at a position, at the tight end position, where it's very thin. And so, we're looking for scraps here. Is there any sign of life? And yes, there is. Because Alex Smith went out, Colt McCoy came in, and he really targeted him. In fact, he had a season-high 71 yards and scored a touchdown. So it's very interesting how the system can really affect the tight end. So we'll see how Jordan Reed does. On top of that, the Cowboys give the 14th most points to tight ends, so that's again a little bit above average to help him there. I wouldn't mess with any of the Dallas tight ends. The guy that's kind of been catching the ball for them, Jeff Schwam, I believe I'm pronouncing that right, he's out. It's funny, I'm doing some research and pulling up the depth chart and the rosters for the Dallas Cowboys and seeing they have like 5 tight ends on their roster and 4 of them are all out. They're pretty banged up right now, so I wouldn't mess with anyone right there. We'll go to kickers now. I kind of like Brett Maher, I believe I'm saying that right, for the Dallas Cowboys. While he does go against the Redskins, who give up the second fewest points to kickers this year, he has kicked and made 5 field goals in the last 2 games, which I like. And again, it's going to be a low-scoring game. The Cowboys are going to run the ball, and they're going to play good defense, and I think they're going to be fine making field goals. And so if you're looking for a plug-and-play this week, I think he should be a okay option. Nothing too exciting, though. And then, of course, on the other side, kicker Dustin Hopkins, he gives up the 13th fewest points, goes against a defense giving with the 13th fewest points to kickers. In 2 of the last 3 games, he has not made a field goal. He's simply not getting opportunities, and that's going to get even worse with his quarterback being gone, and so I wouldn't play Hopkins. And then short and simple guys for the defenses. I like the Cowboys this week going up against a Redskins offense that's quite a bit banged up. The running backs are banged up. The quarterback situation is messed up. The wide receivers were never pretty. So I'd start the Cowboys. I think they're going to take advantage of the Redskins. But on the other side, the Redskins, I'm probably not going to play them. The Cowboys play it safe. They don't turn the ball over. They're nothing too exciting. And so I don't think there's a lot of fantasy value there for them this week. All right, guys, that's my analysis for this game. If you want any more information, make sure to let me know.
Yeah, you didn't mention it there, but you're right. A lot of guys are missing. Also, the offensive line, I think, is missing 3 starters. So
yes.
Just a ton of reasons why to avoid that. So let's take a look at the Saints versus the Falcons. Start with Drew Brees, quarterback. He's playing Atlanta, allowing the 3rd most points to quarterbacks. There's a lot of talk, and rightfully so right now in the NFL, about like Pat Mahomes, Todd Gurley being MVPs. But I think you got to throw his name in there. Drew Brees is having a phenomenal year, under the radar a little bit. He's got 25 touchdown passes to only 1 interception, a quarterback rating, a best of his career, and it would be best all time if it ended today at 126.9. It's phenomenal. That's crazy
insane.
Good, yeah. He's playing the Falcons defense 29th in the NFL, allowing 27.6 points per game. This is going to be a big game for Drew Brees. Obviously, start him. They'll get Matt Ryan. So Matt Ryan's playing Atlanta, giving up the 2nd most points to quarterbacks there. New Orleans going to torch that Falcons defense, and Matt Ryan's going to have to throw early and often to keep pace with them. Undoubtedly, that's going to happen in this game here. Now, back when Ryan faced the Saints in Week 3, he exploded. He had 374 yards and 5 TD passes. Now, a couple things there. One, this game's going to be in New Orleans. Also, that Saints defense has made some adjustments. They've improved a little bit there. So don't expect Matt Ryan to go off and do that. With that said, I think easily, 275 to 300 passing yards and a couple touchdowns makes Matt Ryan a must-start this week. So I like him. As far as running backs go, we got Tevin Coleman, the running back for the Atlanta, playing the Saints, allowing the 5th fewest points to backs. Now, I think it's really hard for running backs or teams that face the Saints to stick to the run. The reason why it's hard to do that is because you fall behind so early and you have to throw the ball early and often, so it's really hard to stick to your running game there. So the running backs that you're going to start versus the Saints is a running back that catches the ball in the backfield, a running back that's very active in the passing game. Well, Tevin Coleman is that type of back there. He's got 26 catches on the year and 4 receiving touchdowns. So I think that gives him value. And I would start Coleman as a running back too. I think he's got a safe floor but a lower ceiling. As far as running backs go for the Saints, you got Alvin Kamara. The Falcons give up the most points to running backs, and he is a stud. Start him as a running back 1. That's kind of a no-brainer. Start Alvin Kamara. I don't think you need me to tell you that one, obviously. Got Mark Ingram. So after returning from the suspension, his yards per carry were lower. He looked a step slower. Was he out of shape? Was it the PEDs? Was that it? Were the PEDs what allowed him to be successful the last few years? It was really hard to tell, but you know what? Last 2 games, he's really rebounded quite a bit. He's had back-to-back games over 100 rushing yards there. Now, he's been used less in the passing game this year. For whatever reason, they're not using him a lot, probably because they got good weapons there and they don't need him to do that. And Alvin Kamara is a better running back in terms of being out in space and catching the ball there. So he's a guy that I would start. He's got lower value in PPR leagues, but started as a running back 1 in standards, a running back 2 in PPR leagues. As far as wide receivers go, let's look at Traquan Smith. So in Monday, he was a non-participant in practice. So that's a concern. You got to monitor that situation a little bit there. But essentially, Monday's practice was a walkthrough. They played Thursday night, and so they weren't really on the field there. But I think he'll be fine. Need to monitor just in case, though. So he plays the Falcons, are allowing the 9th most points to wide receivers. So he exploded last week. He had 10 catches, 157 yards, and a touchdown. It's really hard to sit this guy because of the upside that he has. He's very talented. Concern I do have is you got Thomas, Ingram, and Kamara are ahead of him in terms of touches go. So that's going to make him inconsistent when it comes to targets. And so he's going to always be a boomer bust, a guy that's going to have a low floor but a very high ceiling. With that said, I think he's a guy that you got to start as a wide receiver 3 this week, but he does carry some risk. This guy could go 4 catches, 100 yards and a touchdown, or just as easily get 2 catches for 25 yards, so just be aware of that. As far as Michael Thomas goes, Starts as a wide receiver 1. He's having his best season as a pro. He's first among wide receivers in fantasy points currently. You just start Michael Thomas. I don't even know why you need me to tell you that, but go ahead and start him. Then you got Julio Jones. So the Saints are allowed the most points to wide receivers. He's leading the NFL in receiving yards, and he's had touchdowns 3 weeks in a row, which has always been kind of Julio Jones' Achilles heel. He can't get in the end zone, but he's found the end zone 3 weeks in a row. So go ahead and start him as a wide receiver 1. As far as Calvin Ridley go and Mohamed Sanu, Sanu's seen a decent amount of targets, and I think this week those numbers will go up a little bit there. But his yards are moderate, and he's not getting in the end zone. And so it makes him a risky play. I think they're going to have to throw a lot to keep up with the Saints, so you get a few more targets. To me, he's a bubble play. He's what I would call a wide receiver 4, right on the edge. If you're in a really, really large league and you're desperate, you could start him this week, but I would prefer to sit him. And that brings us to Ridley. So Ridley torched them back when he played him in Week 3 at 7 catches, 146 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He's got 7 touchdowns on the year, but only 1 touchdown in the last 6 games. So I wouldn't expect a huge game from him there because, one, like I mentioned, that Saints defense has improved. But he's going to see a few extra targets as they have to throw quite a bit there. And so for me, I look at Ridley as a wide receiver 3 start this weekend. As far as tight ends go, you got Austin Hooper playing the Saints, allowing the 3rd fewest points to tight ends. Now, Hooper has excelled in tight end friendly matchups. Okay, but this is not one of those. This is not a tight end friendly matchup there. And so I wouldn't expect a huge game from Hooper. Now, the Saints defense has made improvements. Like I said, there's a lot of reasons why I would lower your expectations. If you could avoid starting him, that would be great. But a lot of you probably don't have viable options out there. You have to start Austin Hooper. So start him, but know that he's probably not going to have a big game. Then you got Benjamin Watson. So Benjamin Watson, he's been solid at times, but 3 of the last 4 games, he's only had a total of 1 catch. And so I think that sitting him is preferred. As far as kickers go, start Lutz, start Matt Bryan in this one, and I would sit both defenses in this game.
All right, sounds good. All right, now we come to another matchup in the Jaguars versus the Bills, and honestly, it's a little bit one-sided just simply because the Bills are an absolute mess right now. But we'll start off with the quarterbacks as usual and go to Blake Bortles. First off, they play the Bills. Quarterbacks for against the Bills, they're giving up the least amount of fantasy points to QBs, and honestly, Blake Bortles probably shouldn't even be a starting quarterback in the NFL right now, so just don't play him.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Okay, so like in the preseason last year, heading into the year, we got a lot of pushback from a couple guys out there. We love you, but you were just dead set against the fact that we said Blake Bortles is not a good quarterback. And I think that we're seeing kind of exactly why we had concerns about this guy. He's a train wreck. In fact, reports are that they're already looking for a new quarterback for next year, that he won't be their starting quarterback. But anyways, sorry, I just had to jump on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that hurts him is the fact that Buffalo's offense is brutal, absolutely awful, and they have one of the best defenses in the NFL. And so, honestly, what I expect to see is the Jags are going to shut down the Bills. The Bills aren't going to do anything. And the Jaguars' offense is going to be a lot of running game, barely score some points, but they're going to win a low-scoring affair. That's how this is probably going to play itself out. On the other side, Matt Barkley, I wouldn't play him too. While he did kind of surprise us last game, 232 yards and 2 touchdowns. That was better than we were expecting. That's still not actually amazing. That's not 300 yards. It's not 3 touchdowns. It was just surprisingly okay of a game. And that was a bit of a fluke playing the Jets defense that was just atrocious last week for whatever reason. I guess flukes happen, you know, but we really can't trust him. Peterman and Allen are both out, so Barkley will be the guy, but I wouldn't start either quarterbacks. Just don't go near him. We come to the running backs. I absolutely think that you have to start Leonard Fournette this week. He has got an insane workload. Last game he had 28 carries. The game before he had 24 carries. This is insane right now. The guy is at like 50 carries plus in the last 2 games. Like, he is the definition of a workhorse, like old school running back, and he's going to continue to do that. So especially in standard leagues, make sure to play him. Again, because this should be a defensive affair, pretty low scoring, he should take advantage of that and score lots of points. On top of that, Buffalo gives up the 10th most points to running backs, just to note. On the other side, LeSean McCoy. People were excited. Last week he exploded for over 100 yards against the Jets. But again, I think that was a fluke. All you need to do is pull up his game log and see that he has been just horrendous all year. He's an older running back who's slowing down on an offense that's not doing him any favors whatsoever. And then he goes against the Jaguars, who are a very good defense and give up the 4th least fantasy points to running backs. Do not start McCoy this week. We move on now to the wide receivers. Let's get Buffalo out of the way. The only one that I even stopped to look at, to take a second to think about, was Calvin Benjamin, and then I immediately remembered they were playing Jacksonville and said, nope, Jacksonville gives up the second fewest points to to wide receivers. The quarterback situation isn't great. He hasn't been great. Honestly, nobody for Buffalo on that wide receiving core should be started. Just none of them. On the other side, we see Dante Moncrief and Dede Westbrook. Now, this is difficult because they're going against Buffalo, who gives up the fewest points to wide receivers. If that team has any just silver lining, any little bright spot, it's Tre'Davious White. I think he's an extremely underrated cornerback, really gets the job done. Honestly, I think in a few years we'll be saying that he's the best cornerback in the NFL. Fully believe that. He was great last year and great this year. And again, with the way this matchup's going to go, they're not going to force the ball. In fact, last week they threw just 18 passing plays to 43 rushes. That's just the way that they are going to play. The wide receivers last week for Jacksonville accounted for just 45 yards of offense. All of the wide receivers together combined for 45 yards. I wouldn't start any of them, Moncrief or Westbrook, in this matchup. So now we come to the tight ends, James. I hope I'm saying this right. O'Shaughnessy or something like that. Probably not going to play him. I'm not going to play Charles Clay. They both have difficult matchups, and they both really haven't performed. Clay's matchup is definitely better, but it's not amazing. And so, again, I'm just going to lean towards not playing those. Those offenses don't like to throw to their tight ends very much, and those tight ends haven't proven themselves to be very productive. Now we go to Buffalo. We'll go to the kickers now. We'll start with Buffalo. Steven Hauschka goes against Jacksonville. They give up the 9th most points to kickers. However, that's because they're such a good red zone defense that teams can get down the field a little bit sometimes, but then they're forced to kick a field goal. Honestly, would be surprised if Buffalo had many opportunities even close enough to kick field goals. And so I'm probably going to say don't start him. On the other side, Josh Lambo. Definitely start Josh Lambo. Bills give up the 5th most points to kickers this week. So I really like that. I think this could be a good week for him. Remember, Josh Lambo. Obviously, you're going to start Jacksonville's defense. They are going to tear apart the Bills. And if you're looking for a fill-in defense, you don't have many options. The Bills might be an option. Jacksonville does give up the 6th most points to defenses. However, as I've said many times today, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse using this phrase a lot. I'm not excited about them, but they are an option. And so that's my rundown for this game. As always, if you need some more in-depth information, leave a comment, and I'll make sure to get it to you.
All right. So let's take a look at the Browns versus the Bengals. Start with quarterback Baker Mayfield. He's playing Cincinnati, allowing the most points to quarterbacks. That defense going into Week 11 was on pace to allow the most yards ever by any defense in the NFL. 3 weeks in a row, they had allowed 500 total yards per game. They were brutal there. Now, against the Ravens, the Bengals defense looked better, but if you look at that Ravens offense, they're very conservative. They started rookie quarterback Lamar Jackson, and like I mentioned the other video, it was like watching a college football game there. They ran a lot of option plays, a lot of running plays there, and so I think that is more of an indication of how conservative the Ravens were, not that the Bengals defense made improvements. That Bengals defense is bad. Now, if you look at Baker, the overall first-round pick from this year has gotten better as the years went on. He had his best game last time he played against the Falcons. He had 3 touchdown passes and a quarterback rating of 151.3. That was excellent. Look at the last 4 games, he had 9 touchdown passes to only 2 interceptions, so he's been really solid there. I think he's a great streaming option against the Bengals this week. I like Baker Mayfield. That brings us to Andy Dalton. So Andy Dalton's playing the Browns, allowing the 15th most points to quarterbacks there. When I look at the matchup this week for Dalton, it's not a bad matchup. It's not a great matchup. There is conversation out there that A.J. Green might be ready to return. Now, I think a lot of people that understand that injury well are saying that he's probably still a week or 2 away. But if he comes back, that drastically affects how I look at the matchup. If Green is in there, I like Andy Dalton. If Green is out, I'd probably look at other quarterbacks out there if you need a streaming option there. So that's just kind of where I'm at with him. I'd prefer to sit him. He's outside the top 15 as far as quarterback rankings go. Let's look at running backs, Joe Mixon. He had a tough week this week, but he's playing the Ravens, allow the fewest points to running backs. Now, he was able to salvage his day. He did have a touchdown, a couple catches, and some yards there, but overall, he did struggle quite a bit. But things are going to open up. He's playing the Browns defense, allows the 5th most points to running backs. I also think it's going to help if A.J. Green does return there. That defense will have to play more honest. They won't be able to sneak up, load the box. You have to account for A.J. Green. I would start Joe Mixon as a running back too. You minus the Ravens game, he's been very good all year long. So I like Joe Mixon. Let's talk about Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb is facing the Bengals, allowing the third most points to running backs. They are 31st in the NFL in defense, allowing 31.2 points per game. Started him as a very high running back too. I love Nick Chubb. He scored 3 out of the last 4 games. In the last 4 games, he's averaging 100 rushing yards per game. You got to like this guy. You got to start Nick Chubb. He's really talented. I know you got him in one league, though, so you got to be excited. It's a dynasty league.
Yeah, it's looking good for the future, that's for sure.
Yeah. That brings us to Duke Johnson. So with the Browns wide receivers not performing really well, Duke has a lot of value in PPR leagues. If you look back the last few years, I think he averaged like 63 catches between 2015 to 2017, and he's doing the same thing again now. The last 5 games, he's had 3 touchdowns receiving and 23 catches for 221 receiving yards. I like Duke Johnson as a PPR play. I would call him probably a running back 3 or flex play in PPR leagues. As far as wide receivers goes, A.J. Green. Playing the Browns, allowing the 5th most points to wide receivers. If A.J. Green returns, obviously you got to start him. Now, normally A.J. Green would be a wide receiver 1, but this week I would say he's a wide receiver 2 start until we can see exactly how healthy he is and how his toe responds to being on the field there. As far as Tyler Boyd goes, I would start him. He's had a very good year. Start him as a wide receiver 2. Then Jarvis Landry. So 3 games in a row, he's really disappointed. Even though he's had some very good matchups on paper, he's very much disappointed there. Now he faces Cincinnati, allowing the 8th most points to wide receivers. Now, if you take a look at that number, they're the 8th most. They allow the 8th most points to wide receivers, but in reality, that number should be a lot worse than it is. First few weeks, they actually did okay, but they've been really bleeding stats and yards to wide receivers. So I think that matchup is actually more friendly for Jarvis Landry than it would appear on paper there. I think he's going to rebound this week. I would start as a wide receiver 2. In PPRs and standards, I would say he's a bubble wide receiver 3 or 4, depending on your league size and scoring system. I would sit all the wide receivers for the Browns in this one. As far as tight ends go, you have David Njoku. Playing Cincinnati, allowing the 3rd most points to tight ends. 5 of 7 games, the last 7 games, he's been productive there. He did have 2 games where he struggled quite a bit there, but I think this week, because of the matchup, you got to start him. He's a top 10 tight end play. Then you got CJ. I always get this one wrong. Azuma, I think it is. Somebody will correct me, whatever. The Browns allow the 2nd most points to tight ends. I think he's got a great matchup, but he's a very below average tight end. He's outside of the top 12. If you're desperate, you can play him, but I would prefer to sit him and go with the tight end that honestly I just see is more consistent than him. I'm somebody I'm more comfortable with. I know earlier in the year you said the same thing. You had a great matchup, Christian. And you actually cautioned against why he's not a great play, and you got a lot of heat from that, and you nailed it. He came out and he laid an egg and had a 0. So that's what you're going to get. The guy like him who's got a great matchup is not very talented. I'd rather avoid him if I could. I would sit both kickers, and I would sit both defenses in this game.
All right, sounds good. Of course, you can ask questions if you want more details as to why. All right, now we get to talk about the Patriots versus the Jets, and let's start out, as always, with the quarterbacks and Tom Brady. While the Jets allow the 10th fewest points to quarterbacks, and Brady has only had 5 touchdowns in the last 5 weeks, a lot of people are nervous. However, the Jets defense played awful last week. Of course, we know that they made Matt Barkley look like he is a legit starting NFL quarterback. Guy went for over 200 yards, 2 touchdowns with no interceptions. I think this is going to be the week that Tom Brady gets back to form. I'm excited to see he can do this week. I expect he'll have 2 touchdowns, maybe 3. So I'm going to say start him, right? The numbers are a little bit deceiving. The Jets defense has played worse lately, and so I'm very excited for that, especially as Michelle gets healthy and what James White is able to do. On the other side, Sam Darnold, guys, don't play him. Simple enough. He's struggling with a foot injury, and he hasn't been a great fantasy option so far this season. What I like is the running backs for the Patriots. Sony Michel is a guy that he's finally going to be coming back like fully healthy. He came back last week, but there were some questions, and let's be honest, your first week back, you're never 100%. And then again, playing the Jets, who allowed 212 rushing yards against them from the Buffalo Bills, who have been awful all year. That running defense also struggled, so I think this could be a very, very good week for Sony Michel. So I would say start him in standards, and you absolutely should start James White in PPR leagues. Last week was one of his worst weeks, but they played the Tennessee Titans, who were very tough against running backs, extremely tough against running backs. Like, that's what they do. And yet he still went out there and had 5 receptions on 8 targets. He's a PPR absolute monster. You got to play him. In fact, it's weird for me to suggest that you start both guys, but I'm feeling like that's a good choice. Now, of course, you have to understand, right? Don't start James White if it's not a PPR. Of course, you don't start some of these guys over some stars, but I imagine a lot of people at this point in the season are running very thin, especially if you're in a league with a flex and you have the opportunity to run 3 running backs. That could certainly happen. Of course, again, I want to caution. I don't want to sound like I'm overhyping them. It very much depends. On the other side, Isaiah Crowell, he ran for a 5-yard touchdown and he had an 18-yard run, and yet last week he still only managed 19 total yards on 7 carries, and that means that his other 5 carries went for negative yards, that they did not go well. On top of that, playing average Patriots defense, give up the 15th fewest points to running backs. Isaiah Crowell is a very interesting one for me because he is absolutely hit or miss. He'll go off for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns, or he'll just disappear. And that was some very good games early on in the season, but he's struggled since. I'm going to say sit Isaiah Crowell. He's had a lot of struggles these last few weeks. Do you have something to say there?
No,
okay.
No, I agree.
All right, just curious, just making sure. We move on to the wide receivers. What about Robbie Anderson? The bye week did give him time to heal up his ankle a little bit, but the Patriots give up the 12th fewest fantasy points to defenses. It's tough. I want to get really excited about this guy. He had a huge stretch last year. We had like 7 touchdowns in 6 games or something like that. I don't remember the exact numbers. But honestly, I'm not excited about him. If you end up playing him, he's a wide receiver 3 or a flex at most. He's not a great pick for this week. But he is still the number 1 wide receiver, and they're probably going to need to throw the ball a lot to keep up with the Patriots. And so he might be a solid plug-in player. He might have a good week. But there's so much risk with that simply because of the quarterback situation. I like Josh Gordon this week. He's been on fire lately, where he's had, of the last 4 weeks, he's had 2 100-yard games. He had a touchdown 2 weeks ago, last week. He did struggle a little bit, but on 4 catches, he had 81 yards. I like Josh Gordon. I think this could be a good week for him. Another guy that I like is, what about Julian Edelman? Julian Edelman in the last 3 weeks has had 2 100-yard games, 104 yards, and then he had 71 yards, 104 yards. Of course, we know he's a PPR specialist. In those 100-yard games, both times he had 9 catches. In a PPR league, Julian Edelman is a good play. He doesn't find the end zone a lot. I think that's more, Josh Gordon. They love to use their running backs, White and Michelle. They try to use Gronkowski. So not only are they playing well lately, but they go against the Jets, who give the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers. So I like both of them as starts, but again, to clarify, I like Edelman more as a PPR and Gordon more as a standard, just to give you a bit of idea as to why. And then, of course, Gronkowski. The position at tight end is so thin that I have a hard time saying sit Gronkowski. But he's been very unimpressive. He's been banged up and struggled with injuries, and he plays a team that gives up the 5th fewest points to tight ends. So while I would expect that you probably aren't likely to find much better of an option, maybe you look out there and maybe your league still has Jack Doyle available or something like that, you may end up getting stuck with him. Not excited about him. Look for some options. Maybe leave a comment. We can talk about maybe finding another guy. But in the end, he might be an option to play. I don't know if you feel the same way. He's just been so awful all year that you hate to put a name like that down, but it's kind of where it's at.
Yeah, so here's where I'm at with it. I doubt that you got Rob Gronkowski and, Zach Ertz on the same team. So
yeah.
If you drafted Rob Gronkowski, you've been probably working the waiver wire for a few weeks out there now. I agree with you. Everything points to major red flags for this guy. And I don't even know if he's 100% honestly is going to play. With that said, it's going to be really hard to find somebody that's a viable option out there. And so you're probably going to start him simply due to the fact that right now he's got a lower floor, but his ceiling's high.
Yeah.
It's just tough. So
it is.
But I agree with your breakdown in terms of the matchup goes.
Yeah, exactly. That's my thing. I just was, I would hate to own him. I cautioned, actually. I had Travis Kelce ranked ahead of him at the beginning of the year, and people had me down on that. Now I'm feeling very relieved that I never drafted him. But on the other side, what about Chris Herndon? He's gaining a little bit of momentum as sort of a deep sleeper as far as our end. However, I wouldn't be too excited about him. While the Patriots give the 5th most points to tight ends, he finished last week with just 34 receiving yards. Again, probably a good tight end, rookies, guys, young guys, they don't do well at that position. The quarterback position isn't doing well. And then you go up against Bill Belichick, who really knows his stuff. I'm not expecting a huge week from him, but he is a guy that we've been watching for a while, so I did want to mention that. As far as the kickers go, Steven Gostkowski, he's an average play. He's got an average matchup, and he's a pretty good kicker, so he's just an okay play. And then Jason Myers, he hit his only field goal, which was a 55-yarder. This comes down to, again, like this is just a situation a lot of tight ends, or excuse me, a lot of kickers find themselves in where he's a good kicker. He seems to be kicking well. He hit a 55-yarder, but they're not letting him kick. And that just comes down to the fact that offense is bad. I would not play him simply because of that situation is not pretty. As far as the defenses go, I'm going to start the Patriots, who will go against the Jets. They give up the 4th most points to defenses. And I'm going to sit the Jets, who 2 of the last 4 weeks have actually scored negative fantasy points. And so they have been awful. Again, finally, that's my rundown for the week.
All right. So let's take a look at the Giants versus the Eagles. Let's start with quarterback Eli Manning versus Philadelphia, allowing the 7th most points to quarterbacks. Last 2 weeks, had 5 touchdown passes and 0 interception. He started the year slow. He's picking things up recently. Eli Manning simply scares me. I'm not going to lie. I think it's time for that franchise to look for a new quarterback there. With that said, he's surrounded by so many great weapons. He's really hard to ignore. You look at Saquon Barkley. This guy is a great pass-catching back. Odell Beckham, I don't need to say anything about him. Sterling Shepard, Evan Ingram. And so he's got weapons around him. And I think this is a game where they're going to have to throw the ball a decent amount playing Philadelphia. I think Carson Wentz is going to recover there. So he's a guy that you could play. I think he's a better play if you're in a league that start 2 quarterbacks or as a streaming option daily fantasy because he should be cheaper. With that said, you probably have safer options out there, but if you need to start him, the matchup, and he is trending upwards there, but yet he's Eli Manning, and that scares me. Look at Carson Wentz. So after 6 really good games, he really ran into a buzzsaw with the Saints last weekend. And I think a lot of it, what happens, they fell behind quickly, and that offense became one-dimensional and predictable, and then made life easier for the Saints defense. Look at 39 seconds into the second half. That score was already 31-7. Right after that, they got the ball back and scored again. And so I think in this week, they're going to remain balanced on offense. They're going to be able to do that. Obviously, Eli Manning's not going to take off on them and have a 3-touchdown lead. That's not going to happen. And I think because they're going to be able to remain balanced, I think he's going to recover. He's going to have a good week there. Now, the Giants allow the 10th fewest points to quarterbacks, but they've also gotten rid of a few guys there on defense. And so I think that he can exploit them. And we saw it early in the year when he faced them on the road in New York. He went for 287 yards and 3 touchdowns. Now they added Golden Tate since then. I like Carson Wentz. Forget about last week. He's going to recover and be just fine. Go ahead and start him. And you got Josh Adams running back there. For a long time, this guy was 85, 90% available after weeks of saying, you got to grab this guy. He's been very good the last 3 weeks. He's the clear lead back for Philadelphia at this point. He was also using the passing game last game, and I think that was good. That was the one thing that we were concerned about, is the lack of involvement in the passing game, and yet they used him, so I think that bodes really well. In the last 3 games, his yards per carry have been 7. It's been really high. They're going to increase his workload because this game they'll be able to stick to the run. I see him getting maybe 12 to 15 carries, a couple targets in the passing game there. Start as a running back to the Giants, allowing the 11th most points to running backs. And then Saquon Barkley. I could give you a lot of stats. I could give you numbers. I could break it down. I could tell you how great he is. Just start the guy. He's just really good. Okay. Maybe the best running back in football right now. What's hindering him is the team that he plays for. If you take him and you put him on the Rams, or if you put him on the Chiefs, or wherever you put him, this guy would be having a phenomenal year, and he is, besides that. So, wide receivers, Odell Beckham plays Philadelphia, allowing the 2nd most points to wide receivers. Started as a wide receiver 1. Odell Beckham is a stud. Sterling Shepard. He was having a really nice season at a wide receiver 3, but then the last 3 games he's been quiet. They've been leaning heavy on Odell Beckham and on Saquon Barkley in that passing game. Plus, you got Evan Ingram, who's come back there. But I think this week he returns to fantasy relevance. And so I think that he can be started as a wide receiver 3 in leagues that are 12 teams or larger. So I think he'll rebound there. You got Golden Tate, the wide receiver for Philadelphia. Last week he saw a bump in playing time against the Saints. He ended up leading the team in targets with 8, catches 5, and yards 48. But a concern was that the Eagles offensive coordinator came out this week and said incorporating Golden Tate in the offense has been difficult. Like, that's a tough thing to hear, and trust this guy. But he is talented, and I think he's going to carry value as a wide receiver 3 in PPR leagues. I would sit him in standards. As far as Alshon Jeffries goes, he plays the Giants. The Giants allowed the 11th fewest points to wide receivers, but he did face him in week 6, and he had 8 catches, 74 yards, and 2 touchdowns there. I would start him as a wide receiver 2. Now versus the Jaguars and the Vikings, they slowed him down, but he also faced shutdown corners Ramsey and Xavier Rhodes. And then last week, of course, that was just a crazy game versus the Saints. So I think that Alshon Jeffrey is going to rebound and have a nice game. Go ahead and start him as a wide receiver too. As far as tight ends go, you have Zach Ertz. Before last week, he was #1 tight end in fantasy scoring. Of course, Travis Kelce goes out, has a huge week, and now he's the #1 scoring tight end. But Zach Ertz is #2. You got to start him. He's a stud. He's the #1 tight end as far as rankings this week goes. Then Evan Ingram plays Philadelphia, allowing the 4th fewest points to tight ends. Since he's returned from his injury, he's been okay. He hasn't been bad. He hasn't been good. But this week, because of the matchup, he's outside top 10 as far as tight end plays go. As far as kickers go, I'd start Elliott. He's a great play. And Rosas has actually been a solid kicker this year. He recovered last year. He struggled quite a bit. He had a huge, coming out of college, this guy looked like he had all the elements to be a great kicker and struggle. But the second year, he has figured things out there. As far as defenses go, I would sit both defenses in this matchup. So.
All right, that sounds good. All right, here we come to the 49ers versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. As far as the quarterback situation goes, just getting right into it, Jameis Winston goes against the 49ers, who allow the 11th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. And he played well last week. I like him this week. I think he's a good option that's probably worth a start. Now, his numbers weren't amazing. It's like, well, you look at face value, he had 199 yards, 2 touchdown interception. Okay, that's all right. But you realize that he didn't get to play the whole game. In fact, he only attempted 16 passes, completed 12 of them. That means he's averaging 16.5 yards per completion. Like, that is unbelievable effectiveness. He looked great. He's got the receiving weapons, right? Cameron Brate's a good tight end. Well, we'll talk about this later. O.J. Howard is out, but Brate's a good tight end. He's got good receiving options. And again, there's always the running back in the defense. That situation is so bad that really helps him. So I like Winston this week. Should be good for him. Nick Mullen goes against the Bucs, who give up the 2nd most fantasy points to quarterbacks. And while he has thrown for 250 yards in each of his 2 starts, and he's combined those 2 games for 4 touchdowns, I don't like him. I'm actually going to stay away from him. First game he went out, he had 3 touchdowns, and the second game he only had 1, and I feel like the first game was honestly a bit of a fluke. I feel like that second game was a bit more of what we're going to see from him. If you're in a 2-quarterback league or a deep 16-team league, right, I've said this all day. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but yeah, you might need to find yourself putting him in there, but I'm going to say avoid it if you can. As far as the running backs goes, Peyton Barber looks like he could be a good play this week. Goes against defense to give the 15th most points to running backs, and he kind of took off last week with 106 yards and a touchdown, really solidifying his role as the premier back in that offense. So good for him. That should hopefully increase his carries this week. I absolutely like that about him. And on the other side, if you have Matt Breida, you should find a way to put him in your lineup at flex, at a running back spot. And here's why. Not only is he going against a defense that allows the 7th most points to fantasy running backs, but he posted his 3rd game with at least 117 yards from scrimmage. He's looking a lot better. And on top of that, Tampa Bay, this is interesting, has given up at least 138 yards and 2 TDs to 3 different running backs over just the last 4 games. 75% of the time, running backs are getting 138 yards and 2 touchdowns against them over the last 4-game span. That's how bad that run defense is. And he's been getting healthier, and he's been improving himself. And really, I like Matt Breida this week. I think this could be a huge week for him. So now we'll move on to the wide receivers. Guys, I like Mike Evans. I know that a lot of people are hating on Mike Evans. They're nervous on Mike Evans. He's really up. He's really down. Here are the facts. He's had 5 100-yard receiving games this year. He's averaging 95.7 yards per game. And remember back a couple of years ago when he had like 172 targets and led the NFL for red zone targets or whatever it was. He had this crazy year. Who was his quarterback? His quarterback was Jameis Winston. So I think this is going to be a good week for him. You should start Mike Evans as a wide receiver too. Deshaun Jackson, he hasn't found the end zone since week 2. He's seriously struggled. He hasn't had a lot of catches. He's not a big target guy. He's, I guess, used to be a burner, but he's, kind of a speedster running back. But he's a little bit older. I think his production's down. He came out the first couple of weeks and he shocked some people, and they thought, has he revitalized his career? And then it's like, well, he's struggled since then. I don't like Jackson. Honestly, I'm going to say probably avoid playing him. As much as I want to root for the guy, I just can't. On the other side, Marquise Goodwin goes against a team that gives up the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers. He's so hit or miss. he is so hit or miss. I hate talking about guys like this, but he's either going to go off for a lot of yards and a touchdown, or he's not going to do anything. And that's because of the wide receiver that he is. He either catches a deep ball for a touchdown on a really nice play and boosts his stats for the game, or he really doesn't do much all game long. He should be nothing more than if a wide receiver 3, nothing more than that if he is that. Of course, it'd be nice in a perfect world to have wide receivers so good you don't have to play him, but as always, we may find ourselves doing that. At the tight end position, again, as I mentioned earlier, O.J. Howard is placed on the IR. He will not play. And so Cameron Brate becomes a very, very good option. While he's struggled this season and has had not more than 3 catches or 34 yards in a game, that's because he's splitting time with O.J. Howard, who was the guy. But if we take a second to look back at some of the numbers from when O.J. Howard isn't there, Cameron Brate has proven himself to be a very good option. He's got very good chemistry with Jameis Winston. This could be a very good week for him, a very good steal for you maybe to pick up in the waiver wire, to run for daily fantasy, and so I like him. I also like George Kittle. Not only do they give up the second most fantasy points to tight ends, he's posted at least 83 receiving yards in 3 of the last 4 games, and he scored 2 touchdowns over that stretch. For whatever reason, he looked good at the beginning of the year, and Jimmy Garoppolo got hurt. We thought that this was going to decrease his production, but for whatever reason, these backup quarterbacks, they're throwing him the ball quite a bit. He's actually getting a lot of opportunities, and so I like Kittle this week, especially at a shallow position. Kicker Cairo Santos, he hasn't made a field goal since week 6, so do not start him simply because of that. That's pretty plain and simple. And then Robbie Gould, he's made multiple field goals in 8 of the last 10 games this season. He's not an exciting kicker. He's not going to kick tons of field goals or be absolutely amazing, right? He's not a guy that's going to go off for 27 points, but he's going to get you 8 to 10, and he goes against a team that gives up the 14th most fantasy points to kickers. So I like Gold this week. I think he's a good start. And then as far as the defenses go, 49ers are very up and very down. They both got good matchups. For whatever reason, both these offenses gives up a lot of points to those defenses, but neither of them are very good defenses, and so I think they're both just average options. If you're looking for a plug-and-play, I'm probably going to lean with the Buccaneers. All right, that's my analysis for this game this week.
All right. So let's take a look at the Seattle Seahawks versus the Panthers. Take a look at Russell Wilson versus the Panthers, allowing the 7th most points to quarterbacks. Last 6 games he's been very good. 16 touchdown passes to only 2 interceptions. Start Russell Wilson in this one. Then you have Cam Newton. Now Seattle only allows second fewest points to quarterbacks, but the number's a little deceitful. Last week we talked about that. You break that down a little bit, you find out that they played a lot of bad quarterbacks during the year, but when they face solid quarterbacks, that defense has been able to be exploited. I would start Cam Newton in this one and feel comfortable about that. As far as running backs go, let's look at Rashad Penny, Chris Carson, and Mike Davis running backs for Seattle. Playing the Panthers, allowing the 9th fewest points to running backs. That matchup doesn't concern me at all. I don't care that on paper they look like they're good at shutting down running backs. That offensive line's been able to exploit very good defenses. They're able to run the ball. That's a very good offensive line running the ball there. What does scare me is the running back by committee. It's concerning me right now because all 3 of those backs have been good, and they've been used a lot, and they've all performed well. Currently, Chris Carson is the guy there. He's leading the team in carries. I would start him as a running back 2 when he is healthy, but I would call him a lower running back 2 because they spread the touches out quite a bit there. Really, honestly, at this point, what needs to happen is needs to be an injury to one of those backs to begin to clear things up there quite a bit. Down the stretch, I do see Penny getting more carries because I think he's a guy they drafted in the 1st round who's going to be the future running back there, and so that might shift things a little bit. But right now, Chris Carson is your guy, and I would sit the other 2 this week. As far as Christian McCaffrey goes in this one, he's a very young, talented running back. I would start as a running back 2 in standards and a high-end running back 1 in PPR leagues. Christian McCaffrey is very talented there. As far as wide receivers go, you got Tyler Lockett. He's got 7 touchdowns on the year playing Carolina, allowing the 14th most points to wide receivers. I don't like the fact that his targets and yards are lower, but it's really hard to ignore his touchdowns at this point. He's got 7 of them. Now, if you look at Carolina, Carolina doesn't allow a lot of yards to wide receivers, but they do allow a lot of touchdowns. And so that's exactly where he's excelled at this point. I would start him as a wide receiver 3 or 4 based on your league size and scoring. I would sit him in PPR leagues. Looks like you're going to say something there?
Nope.
Okay. Then Doug Baldwin. Doug Baldwin, before last game, came on and said his knee is finally healed up. He feels like he's 100%. And sure enough, he comes out last game. He has most targets. He found the end zone, and he's trending upwards. I would start him as a wide receiver 3. Takes us to Devin Funchess, a wide receiver for the Panthers. So with Moore's development, DJ Moore's looked really good there. And the fact that he wasn't a great wide receiver to begin with, this is a guy now that last 4 games he's only averaging 35 receiving yards per game. Sit him. I would just stay away from Devin Funchess. He doesn't have any value at this point. You can't trust him. Then you have DJ Moore. So DJ Moore is playing Seattle alone, the 13th most points to wide receivers. He's seen an increase in stats, targets, usage, snaps ever since week 3. Now he's a former first-round pick, and he's clearly the most talented wide receiver on that roster, but he's still young, and typically wide receivers don't thrive in Cam Newton-led offenses. They're always limited, and so I would start him as a wide receiver 3, but because he's a rookie and because that offense, he's going to run boom or bust weekly and not be consistent. He's got a low floor but a very high ceiling. That's kind of where I'd put him. As far as tight ends go, you got Greg Olsen playing Seattle, allowing the 6th fewest points to tight ends. He's had a touchdown 4 last 5 games, and he's their most trusted pass catcher apart from Christian McCaffrey. You need to start Greg Olsen in that one. I would sit the Seattle tight ends. As far as kickers go, I would start Gano and Janikowski in this one, and I would sit both defenses. So,
all right, that works.
I think I'm on to the next game. So let's take a look at the Raiders versus the Ravens there. So let's look at Derek Carr playing the Ravens, allowing the 11th fewest points to quarterbacks. He's had a few games this year where he's played well in fantasy terms, but his weapons aren't there. He's inconsistent. I would sit him against a very good Ravens defense. As far as Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson, whoever's going to start in this one, it would appear like Lamar Jackson's going to be the guy playing Oakland, allowing the 13th fewest points to quarterbacks. 13th most points to quarterbacks. If you look at last game, the play count is very conservative for the Ravens and Jackson there. He only attempted 19 passes, completing 13. He threw 1 interception and 0 touchdowns. Now, he had a huge game in terms of rushing. He had 27 carries, 117 yards. That was a very good matchup that he had, and they played it very conservatively, very much like watching a college football game there. He was successful in terms of running the ball, but this is the NFL. And you can't continue doing that for a lot of reasons. One, teams are going to adjust. They're going to look at film. They're going to make adjustments. And he's not built like Cam Newton. This guy is like 115 to 120 pounds. He can't handle the wear and tear of 27 carries again. So I think if you expect him to go out there and do that again, I think that you're going to be very disappointed. If he can't start to make some throws, he's going to struggle in the NFL. That undoubtedly is going to happen there. I think that this week a lot of people won't agree with me. I'm going to advise sitting Lamar Jackson in this one. If Flacco is good to go, the coach has publicly said if Joe Flacco is ready to play, he's going to be our starter. So if Joe Flacco glows in this one, if Flacco plays, he did struggle before the injury. So even before getting injured, Joe hadn't been that productive there. I see a lower scoring game between the two. I think the Ravens defense is going to really shut down that Raiders team. And so I would sit these quarterbacks. I don't care which one it is. I don't care if it's Jackson. I don't care if it's Flacco. I don't care if it's Derek Carr. I would sit all 3 quarterbacks in this one. As far as running backs go, you had Doug Martin. Doug Martin actually ran the ball and had looked good for a couple games there. Then Coach Gruden at halftime said the reason why Martin was benched is they wanted to get Washington some more touches. That doesn't sound good. I would sit Doug Martin. I don't know what's going on there. I suppose here's the idea. This Coach Gruden, he realizes that this is not going to be their year. They are a rebuilding team. You look at Martin coming up on 30. He's not a young running back anymore. You look at these other running backs. You look at Richard. You look at Washington. They're the future of that team. Probably wants to get a look at these guys and see what they bring to the table. And so I would just stay away from Doug Martin there, who's not young anymore. You bring Jalen Richard. Now, he's playing the Ravens, allowed the fewest points to running backs. Last week, they gave Joe Mixon a very hard time. Now, if you look at Jalen, he's got 51 catches for the year, on pace for 81. I actually think that number could go up a little bit there, especially since they've lost a lot of wide receivers. So with a lack of weapons, he may struggle to find room with that Ravens stout run defense, but I think he's going to be targeted offense. He's going to be targeted often in the passing game. So I would start him as a running back 3 or a flex playing PPRs. I would sit him in standards. As far as running backs go for the Ravens, you have Gus Edwards. So he crushed it last week. 17 carries, 115 yards, 6.8 yards per carry. The guy surprised everybody. Now, if you go back to week 6, he hadn't had any carries, but in week 6, he got his first action. He had 10 carries for 42 yards. And then after that, he really began to get increased looks there in that offense. They've increased his usage. Now, if you take a look at this point, the Ravens don't have any incentive or investment to feel the pressure to stick with Alec Collins at this point. I think Gus could easily become the starting back there. In fact, after last game, Coach Harbaugh came out. He loved his play, and he bragged up the rookie running back there. Now he's playing Oakland, allowing the 7th most points to running backs. I would sit Collins, I would sit Allen, I would start Gus as a running back 2, but I would say low-end running back 2. We need to get a larger sample size before we know exactly how good this guy is going to be there. As far as wide receivers go, you got John Brown and Michael Crabtree. So if Jackson starts, I would sit all wide receivers for the Ravens. If Flacco's good to go and he plays, I would start Brown as a wide receiver 3, but I would sit Crabtree no matter who the quarterback is. Their Crabtree's value is non-existent at this point. As far as Raiders wide receivers go there, Brandon LaFell was looking better and better. He looked like a guy that was trending upwards and may have a limited role, that somebody that you could consider. He tore his Achilles. He's on the IR, so obviously there's nobody there that you can trust. I would sit all Raiders wide receivers. The one guy that's going to see the most benefit is Marcel Atman. He'll see an increase in targets, but once again, you can't trust him. Sit all wide receivers for the Raiders. As far as tight ends go, I would sit the Ravens tight ends. As far as Jared Cook, the tight end for the Raiders go, versus the Ravens allowing the 14th most points to tight ends, I would start him there. All their weapons are kind of banged up or hurt. I think he's going to be their go-to guy in terms of targets. He'll probably get 10 to 12 targets in this game. As far as kickers go, I would start Tucker. I would sit Carlson, start the Ravens defense, and sit the Raiders defense in this one. So that takes us to the Cards versus the Chargers. Let's look at quarterback Josh Rosen. Playing the Chargers, allowing the 6 fewest points to quarterbacks. Now that Chargers defense lost Perriman, linebacker, and Corey Liggett is out for a while, but then of course Joey Bosa came back last game. Now he was out of shape. He didn't see a lot of snaps. You could tell he wasn't quite there yet. But I think that Joey Bosa coming back really offsets the loss of those 2 players there. This is a defense that had been trending upwards and playing well. I would sit Josh Rosen in this one. That rookie has struggled quite a bit playing the defense that is looking better and better. As far as Phillip Rivers goes, he plays the Cards, allowing the 4th fewest points to quarterbacks. He's having his best season as a pro currently. He's on pace for 37 touchdown passes, and his quarterback rating of 112 is very, very good. He can be started against the Cardinals, but I think what's going to happen, the Chargers are going to run the ball a lot. I think that Chargers defense is going to shut down the Cards, and so I think Rivers is a solid play with a lower ceiling. As far as running backs go, you got Austin Eckler. The Cards give up the 5th most points to running backs. I would really sit Eckler at this point. The only way I see him having value is if Melvin Gordon were to get hurt, or it's a blowout, and we don't know that. So once again, I don't trust Austin Eckler, even though he has talent and he could do well. He performs best in PPR leagues, but this week, once again, I would sit him. And then Melvin Gordon, start him. He's a stud. Obviously, Melvin Gordon's having a great year. Go ahead and start him. Then David Johnson. So running back David Johnson for the Cardinals. New offensive coordinator Brian Leftwich, since he's taken over the offense, has shown some improvement. And he's really, really helped Johnson's usage there. Brian Leftwich has been a huge boost for David. Last 2 games, he had 235 rushing yards, 5.1 yards per carry. He's highly used in the passing game. Start David Johnson as a running back too. Even with his struggles this year, he's still got 8 touchdowns in 10 games there. As far as wide receivers go, I got Christian Kirk. Playing the Chargers, allowing the 7th fewest points to wide receivers, sit Christian Kirk in this one. Then you have Larry Fitzgerald. He's had 4 touchdowns in the last 4 games. He's more productive, but the matchup is not good for him. I would advise sitting Larry Fitzgerald in this one. As far as Keenan Allen goes, last season's production really took off after Week 9. Well, it's taken off again after Week 9. But this week he's going to see a lot of Patrick Peterson. And so I think you look at that. The Cardinals allow the 10th fewest points to wide receivers. Don't sit Keenan Allen. You need to play him, but play him as a mid-range wide receiver 2 in this one. I would sit Mike Williams or Tyrell Williams. As far as tight ends go, last week, Antonio Gates, we saw vintage Gates. He had a great game last week, but besides that game, he's really not worth playing. He's a great tight end. He's a Hall of Famer, but you're going to see his below-average production against the Cardinals, allowing the 7th fewest points to tight end, so stay away from Antonio Gates, even though he had a good game last game. That was an anomaly there. As far as Ricky Seals-Jones go, I would sit Ricky. There are more trustworthy options out there at tight end than to trust him. I would start kicker for the Chargers, and I would sit Dawson. I would start the Chargers defense, and I would sit the Cardinals defense in this one.
All right, so now we come to the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Denver Broncos, and this is actually a really fun matchup for me to look at. Again, I don't want to waste any time, so we'll just get going here. Ben Roethlisberger, got to start the guy. Over the last 2 games, he's combined for 7 touchdowns and over 640 yards. He's got some of the best weapons in the NFL. There's no arguing against this guy. Denver, a lot of people see Denver as a great defense, and this year they're a good defense, but they're actually allowing the 15th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, but 15th fewest is essentially average. Like, that's right around the middle, and so that's really not that bad. That's actually that's an okay matchup. On the other side, we see Case Keenum. Guys, don't play Case Keenum. Not only does Pittsburgh get insane pressure, I believe they're leading the NFL for sacks, but Keenum's just struggled all year long. We played 10 games now or whatever, and he has only 11 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. It's just not great, honestly. I'm not a big fan. Of course, you absolutely have to play James Conner. He's been just awesome all year. Yeah, he struggled last week, but who did he play? Jacksonville, one of the best run defenses in the NFL. So don't let that bother you. He comes into this week against Denver, who gives up the 12th most points to running backs, which is above average. That's good. On the other side, we see Freeman and Lindsey. Of course, by now, if you don't know it, Lindsey really seems to be the guy in that offense. He really does. And while Pittsburgh gives up the 7th fewest points to running backs, I still think that Lindsey is a pretty good option. Yeah, he turned 15 touches into 106 scrimmage yards and 2 touchdowns last week against the Chargers defense. And the Chargers defense is actually fairly respectable, fairly good defense, and so they're no chumps. I like Lindsey this week, especially with that added PPR value. While Royce Freeman has scored, I believe last week in their victory, he scored his 5th touchdown this year. I'm not huge on Royce Freeman this week. He doesn't catch the ball in the backfield. He doesn't get a lot of yards because he's just not used much in that offense, so he's touchdown dependent, and he hasn't had a lot of touchdowns. I could be wrong. He might score this week, but it'll be by chance if it does happen. So I'm going to start Phillip Lindsay. I'm not going to start Freeman if I can. Going into the wide receivers, of course you're going to start Antonio Brown. The guy's got 11 touchdowns in 10 games. He's insane. Of course you're going to start Juju Smith-Schuster. He had his 5th 100-yard receiving game this last week, and 8 of his 10 targets he had 104 yards. So he's doing also very well. It's pretty surprising how well they're able to do next to each other. I'm going to play both of them. For the Denver Broncos, Emmanuel Sanders, I think he's a wide receiver 3 this week. Excuse me. Because he's the number 1 guy, he's had some big games this year, but he struggled a little bit down the stretch. His quarterback situation isn't great. The thing that gets him on this list is that he has had a few games and that he is the number 1 wideout, but I'm not going to put him too high against a fairly good defense. And then Cortland Sutton, I'm just not going to play him yet. We haven't seen enough. He's got 3 of 6 targets and tied a season high for 78 yards last week when they beat the Chargers, but he didn't find the end zone. He isn't looking great. 78 yards isn't an awesome season high, and so nothing too much to be excited about there. We move on to the tight ends. Vance McDonald, heck, it's a thin position at tight end, so you might as well start Vance McDonald, who's had touchdowns in back-to-back weeks and plays a defense that gives up the 10th most points to tight ends. If you're looking for an option, McDonald might be a good play this week, but he's certainly not going to be an amazing play, that's for sure. He's no Zach Ertz. On the other side for Denver, Jeff Heuerman, I hope I'm saying that right. After scoring back-to-back weeks, he stepped back last week and only had 20 receiving yards. I'm not a huge fan. I'm probably going to look elsewhere for my streaming option this week. Especially when you look at the fact that Pittsburgh, they lost Ryan Shazier and they struggled for 10, 11 games, and then they've really picked it up recently, and that defense seems to be getting very hot. And so, yeah, I'm going to sit Jeff Heuerman there. As far as the tight ends go, Brandon McManus, he's only kicked 1 field goal in 5 of his last 6 games. So the Denver kicker, Brandon, I'm probably not going to play him. Chris Boswell, on the other hand, he's only made 8 field goals this season. That makes the Steelers the 2nd worst team when it comes to made field goals. I'm also going to sit him. They just also, for whatever reason, Pittsburgh isn't kicking the ball much. While it is true he makes lots of extra points, he does kind of weasel away his in there due to the 1 point here and there to all the touchdowns. I'm still not a huge fan, especially on a team that's perfectly fine going for 2-point conversions. And so Boswell if you're desperate, but definitely not McManus. As far as the defenses go, I'm excited. I would play the Steelers. The Steelers, as I said, they got 11 sacks in the last 2 games. I believe they're leading the NFL for sacks. I think they could tear the Denver offense apart, so I like them. And I wouldn't start the Broncos defense. Pittsburgh gives up the 4th fewest points to defenses, and so honestly, I don't think this week looks too bright for them. Again, that's my matchup or my opinion on this matchup for this week. If you disagree with me, let me know. If you have any questions, feel free to do so.
Well, let's take a look at the Dolphins versus the Colts. I start with Ryan Tannehill. He'll be back this week. Now he's playing Indianapolis, giving up the 17th fewest points to quarterbacks there. This defense is young, but they're very talented. They're getting better each week there. Now Ryan came out and said that he can make all the throws that he needs to make, but his shoulder still hurts. You add that to the fact he doesn't have a lot of great weapons there. I would sit Ryan Tannehill in this one. Then that brings us to Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck is the hottest quarterback in the NFL right now. He's hotter than Pat Mahomes. I know a lot of you are not going to like that, but numbers stated. In the last 7 games, he's had 24 touchdown passes. Pat Mahomes during that same stretch has only had 23. But the difference for me is that Pat Mahomes had a lot more interceptions during that stretch. So right now, Andrew Luck is so on fire. He's playing great. Start Andrew Luck in this one. As far as running backs go, look at Kenyon Drake, running back for the Dolphins. The Colts allow the 12th most points to running backs. Drake, when he's been given a significant amount of touches, not only this year but last year, he's been productive. Right now, his yards per carry of 4.6 are good there. He's got solid hands, but for whatever reason, the coaches seem resistant to give him the ball, and they're committed to getting Gore touches, and I don't quite understand that. So you need to sit Kenyon Drake until the coaches decide to wake up and just give him more carries there. I really don't know what they're thinking there. As far as Frank Gore goes, they are committed to giving the ball. I think he's had double-digit carries like the last 8-9 games in a row, whatever it is. So he does have value in standard leagues, but it's very low as a running back 2/3 in big leagues. I would sit him in any PPR leagues. As far as Marlon Mack goes, he plays Miami, allowing the 4th most points to running backs. I would start him. As far as T.Y. Hilton goes, last week a lot of people asked, should you play him? We said yes, start him, even in the Q&A in the bottom. And so we hope that you did that. He had a really good week out there. I would start T.Y. Hilton as a wide receiver 2 in this matchup. Then there's Danny Amendola. Danny Amendola, the wide receivers for Miami. Playing Indianapolis, allowing the 9th fewest points to wide receivers. This is a guy that could only be started in PPR leagues as a wide receiver 3 or flex if you're in a large league. Now, since week 6, he's averaged 6.2 catches per game, so he'll get you that. He's a guy that'll get you 6 catches, 80 yards. He's not going to get a touchdown. He probably won't break 100 yards, but he is a safe play there in PPR leagues. And I would sit all other Miami wide receivers. And I would sit all other Colts wide receivers. As far as tight ends go, Eric Ebron. He's got 10 touchdowns in the year, so you can't sit this guy. He's been great. But Doyle's getting more targets, and that really lowers his value there. And so I would start him as a low-end tight end play. Playing Miami, allowing the 17th fewest points to tight ends. As far as Jack Doyle goes, his value's been lowered by Eric Ebron there, so he's not a top tight end play this week, but he's definitely a guy that you can play. He's got what I call a safe floor but a lower ceiling. I would sit the Miami tight ends. I would start Adam Vinatieri, and I would sit Sanders the kicker. I would start the Colts defense, and I would sit the Miami defense.
All right, so now we come to the Vikings-Packers for starters. I have a lot on this game. Let's go Vikes. Hopefully we can win this and get back on track. But back to the fantasy, we'll get to the quarterbacks. Of course, you're going to start Aaron Rodgers. Not only is this, if of any quarterback in the NFL, I am confident in him more than any other guy that he could just go off any week for 4 touchdowns, 350 yards, for sure. But he's also consistent in 4 of the last 5 games. He's had multiple touchdowns. So, of course, you're going to start Rodgers. Despite the slightly tough matchup against that Vikings pass defense. Kirk Cousins, on the other hand, this one is a little bit interesting. I know some people are going to say don't. Some people are going to say do. I don't know how you feel about this, Rob, but I'm actually going to say start Kirk Cousins. Last time he played the Packers, he threw for 425 yards and 4 touchdowns. So I like Rodgers' ability to hopefully score, well, at least fantasy-wise, hopefully score on the Vikings and force Kirk Cousins to throw the ball a little bit. And that running game hasn't been terribly productive, so I like Kirk Cousins as a pretty good matchup, not an amazing matchup. We come to the running backs. Aaron Jones. Now, this is a tough one. He has been red hot lately. He has been on fire. But he plays a defense that allows the 6th fewest fantasy points to running backs in the game that could absolutely, certainly be a shootout. And so I find myself saying, and again, I apologize for this, but if you're looking at a running back 2 or a flex spot and you don't have another option that you love, definitely play him. But if you're, say, in a PPR league or you've got some other choices, I wouldn't. Definitely don't play him in a PPR league. On the other side, Dalvin Cook. I would probably start Dalvin Cook. The Packers defense is about average against the run, and though he struggled against the Bears defense is a very good defense. They absolutely impressed me. Of course, they've been slowly impressing me more and more, but against the Vikings, they did amazing. But what I thought was a really good sign for him was that he played a career-high snaps, 59 snaps that game. He looked healthy, and that for me is a huge sign. That means he's going to come into this week healthy. They're not afraid, hopefully, again, to give him another career high in snaps. Give him the ball. This could be a good week for Dalvin Cook. Of course, we go to the wide receivers. Davante Adams, I think you got to start him. While the Vikings give up the third fewest points to wide receivers, he's had 132 yards or more in 4 of the past 6 games. And on top of that, in that stretch of 6 games, he's had 6 touchdowns. It's a tough matchup, but I feel like he's almost a matchup-proof guy. I feel like you have to start Davante Adams. Adam Thielen, he's an obvious must-start against a defense that gives up the 10th most points to wide receivers. And same with Stephon Diggs. In the last 2 games that Diggs has played in, he's had 10 catches for 119 yards and a touchdown and 13 catches for 126 yards and a touchdown. So I also think you should start Stephon Diggs, although I would say Thielen's a wide receiver 1 and Diggs is probably more of a wide receiver 2 or 3. I feel like I'm just saying start, but I really expect this to be quite a bit of a shootout this week, and so hopefully I'm right on that one. It definitely seems to be that way. As far as tight ends go, this one's interesting. Kyle Rudolph, I'm going to say don't start him. Not only does he play the Packers, who go against the defense that gives the 4th fewest points to tight ends, he hasn't scored since week 3, and he hasn't had more than 8 fantasy points since that game. That is just super low production. You can't trust the guy. Jimmy Graham goes against an average defense against tight ends, and he's still marked as questionable. He's only combined for 2 receptions in the last 2 weeks. Things aren't looking great. I'm not going to start Jimmy Graham, and neither should you. So we'll move on now to the kickers. Mason Crosby. The Vikings give up the 2nd most points to kickers, and Mason Crosby is a pretty good kicker. However, he's only made 1 field goal in the last 3 games. And so if you're looking for a stream this week, I feel like this could be a good week for him, but it's far from a safe play. If you put him in your lineup, fully understand that it's a risk. You know, it is a risk, but he definitely has high upside because of that offense and because of, we've seen him, right? He had a terrible game this season, but we've seen him throughout his career. He's been a very good kicker. Dan Bailey is kind of just the opposite, where he's a very safe kicker. He's got a high floor and a low ceiling. He's gone 3 for 3 on field goals in the last 3 games. He's making the field goals he's kicking, but they're not letting him kick a whole lot. And so Dan Bailey, if you're not trying to take risks, if you just want to get a few points and you're fine with it for a plug and play this week. But Mason Crosby has a lot more upside. The Vikings defense go against the Packers, who give the 17th fewest. I don't know if I would start them this week. I just don't. Aaron Rodgers doesn't turn the ball over a whole ton. Aaron Jones is getting better. He did have that fumble a couple of games ago, but of course he's looked better and better every week, and I feel like they're going to put some points up on the board. And then the Packers go against the Vikings, who give up the 8th most points. The Vikings who give the 8th most points to defenses. They've had 9 sacks in the last 2 games, and when getting 4 sacks, they're averaging 14 to 17 points a game. And so if they can keep that sort of pressure on, which they have in the last couple of games, they should actually be a fairly good start. I would start the Packers, but not expect much from them. That's my rundown from this week.
Okay. So let's get to our final game there, the Texans versus the Titans. Look at Deshaun Watson versus the Titans, allowing the 7th fewest points to quarterbacks there. I would lean towards sitting Watson in this one there. That Texans defense is playing well, so I see a very low-scoring affair, very similar to when they played the Redskins there. And so I just think that there's so many things right now that's going to lean towards lower production for him. They had Marcus Mariota or Blaine Gabbert, whoever's going to start in that one. There's really conflicting reports. One report was that Marcus Mariota had a stinger in his neck or head, and he's been cleared there. Another one, they hurt his elbow. And so it's really hard to know for sure. But if he did aggravate that elbow injury he had earlier in the year, the one we saw that he really limited his throws there, and he really struggled for a few games. And so you add the fact that he's injured. We don't know exactly the extent of the injury, if it is his elbow. The fact that Texans defense is playing really good right now, allowing the 5th fewest points to quarterbacks, I would sit both of them. I won't take any chance with either one of those quarterbacks there. Brings us to running backs. Derrick Henry, the running back for the Titans. So I would sit Derrick Henry. The Texans are allowing the 10th fewest points to running backs right now. Now his last game, his yards looked decent, but if you watch the game, what you found, what the yards that he had were late in the game when the Colts were conceding the run and playing the pass. And so that was not indicative, I think, of how he's ran. In fact, what's indicative is the fact that he's got a 3.7 yards per carry all year. He has struggled quite a bit there. You also added the fact that he is not using the passing game. I would sit him. As far as Deion Lewis goes, I would start in PPR leagues as a running back 3 or flex play. Then Lamar Miller. The Titans allow the 3rd fewest points to running backs, but he's still what I call he has value as a volume play. He's averaging 16 carries per game and 82 yards per game there. So he's got a safe floor, but he doesn't have very high ceiling. He's a safe play, but not very exciting. So I would start him if you're in a league that's 14 teams or larger. As far as wide receivers go, you got Corey Davis. The Texans allowed the 6th fewest points to the wide receivers. Earlier, he struggled quite a bit when Marcus was injured, and so until Marcus Mariota is back to 100% again, I would just sit Corey Davis in this one. Then you got Demaryius Thomas. I would sit him. He plays the Titans allowing the 6th most points to wide receivers, but Kiki Cutie, I always get that wrong.
Something like that. It's close enough.
Kiki Cutie. He came back, and really Kiki was targeted quite a bit in that game, and you look at Thomas, only had 1 target in that game, not very good there, and so I would sit him. He's like the 3rd option in that offense behind Kiki and Hopkins, so I would sit Thomas in what I think is going to be a lower scoring game. Then you have Kiki QT playing the Texans, or the Titans, I should say, allowing the 9th most points to wide receivers. We advised sitting him last week and Demaryius Thomas until we saw exactly what target share would look like in usage. And here's what we found. Like I mentioned, Thomas got 1 target, and Kiki had a very good game. 9 targets, 5 catches, 77 yards. I would start him as a wide receiver 3. Then DeAndre Hopkins, I don't even need to tell you. Doesn't matter who he's playing against. Doesn't matter the matchup. He's matchup proof. You start him every week. I would sit all tight ends in this game. I would start the Houston's kicker, and I would sit the Titans kicker suck up. I would start the Houston's defense, and I would sit the Titans defense. So that's my breakdown of the game.
All right, sounds good. Great information.
Rhett, if you have any more questions or concerns or thoughts, please share them on the bottom. Once again, thanks for joining us. God bless and take care.